This is AJ Wachtel. Welcome to my podcast, Wachtelligence, where I discuss with my guests the past, present, and future of the local and national music scene with a focus on Boston and New England. Today's episode, Johnny A, six-string superstar, is about the legendary life and career of a guitarist who loves melody, inspired and passionate players, and the whammy bar. Johnny's music bio includes stints with beloved Boston bands The Streets, Johnny A's Hidden Secret, and Hearts on Fire. He also formed the backing band full of Boston players for Derek and the Dominoes founder and keyboardist Bobby Whitlock, and was a music director for Jay Giles' frontman Peter Wolf's band for 7 years. Johnny was also a member of the Yardbirds for 3 years, following in the footsteps of Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, and Jeff Beck. I can't wait to hear what he's up to today. Welcome to Wachtelligence, Johnny.
Well, how you doing there, Mr. AJ? Mr. AJ Watt, tell me what you're doing.
Listen, I know you forever and ever, and most of these questions and most of the conversation that we're going to talk about, we've gone through over the years. But, you grew up in Malden, and tell me about growing up in Malden in the suburbs. What was that like?
Well, Malden, it really was a little bit more city-like than I wouldn't know if it was like a suburb, because it's really only about 5 miles from Boston, right? 3, 4, 5 miles from Boston. And I used to take drum lessons down the street from Mr. Orlito right off of Easton Avenue, Ferry Street, I think. And it's where I saw the Beatles' A Hard Day's Night at the Granada or the Strand Theater. There used to be 2 theaters there in Malden Square. It's where I bought my pair of Beatle boots there. I think Kresge's or Woolworths or something like that. It was fun, played Little League Baseball in Malden. This was good. Lived with my grandparents. My mom and my dad had got divorced when I was about 4 years old. And my Aunt Helen's husband had died. So it was my grandmother, my grandfather, my aunt, my mother, myself, my cousin Sue, and my Uncle Tom, all living at this one little house in Malden on 59 Hill Street. And went to school in the early days in Malden at Forest Dale, then went to Linden, then, moved all around Malden. I lived on Hill Street, I lived on Goodwin Ave, I lived on Hancock Road, I lived on Ferry Street, Salem Street, all over the place. And then around middle school, maybe 6th, 7th grade, we kind of migrated to the sticks, Saugus. And that's where I graduated high school, in Saugus, and then moved to Linfield after that, and then started traveling as a musician.
And you first got the name Johnny A when you were about 8 years old. How did that happen?
It just was, it just stuck. I had to have a very long Greek name, and it was always getting misspelled, mispronounced. So people always just kind of called me Johnny A, which is, they called my dad was a bartender at a Middle Eastern club on Tremont Street in the day called the Club Kayam, where they had belly dances and Greek music and all that stuff. He was a bartender, and they used to call him Billy A. And Johnny A, it just kind of came naturally and stuck. Everybody says, "Oh, yeah, you got a stage name," and it's like I was just always called that. So just
you were born with a stage name.
Yeah, right.
Hey, your first guitar and your first influence. Let's talk about that for a minute.
Okay, first guitar, because I was a drummer.
I know you started playing drums at 6.
Right, I started playing drums at 6 till about the transition year was like 64-ish when
you met the Beatles.
Yeah, and so I was still playing drums and starting to learn guitar around that time. But the first guitar was there used to be a little electronics store a chain called Lafayette Electronics, and I had an electric 6-string. It was $49. I remember how much it cost. And a matching little amplifier that I proceeded to blow up fairly quickly. And that was my first electric guitar.
How
And
much do you
I
think the
didn't even
guitar
know
would be worth today?
I don't have that one. That took a journey by way of Jimi Hendrix smashing it type of thing. So that one isn't around. But the other one that I still do have was the first one that I bought with my own money, which was maybe a year later. My aunt, Helen, used to own a beauty shop in Medford Square called the Continental, right on the main street there in Medford Square. And I used to go in on Saturdays and sweep, hair clippings for them. And they'd give me like $5 every Saturday to do this. I think I might have been, I don't know what year. I must have still been 64 or something like that. And I saved up, and I used to go down to the music store in Medford Square and look in the window and go inside. And there was this white Vox guitar that was $88, I remember. And it was called a Vox Clubman. And kind of student model type of guitar, shaped like a Fender Stratocaster with a couple pickups. And it was $88. And I remember going in and putting the $5 down, and every week going in and, until I paid off the guitar. And I still have that one. That one I still have.
You brought up Jimi Hendrix and smashing the guitar. Your sound has, aspects of Jeff Beck, Jimi Hendrix, Chet Atkins, Wes Montgomery, Pat Martino, Les Paul. Care to comment?
They're just all giants of the instrument. And I just had an insatiable appetite for listening to all types of music. I went through a lot of different phases of music, starting with, as a drummer, listening to people like Sandy Nelson and bands like the Safaris and whatnot. And then, obviously with the British invasion, getting introduced to all that great pop rock music with the Beatles and the Hollies and the Animals and the Stones and the Dave Clark Five and the Yardbirds and, all these bands. And then as that phase kind of moved into another phase, I started to get into all the British blues guys, and by way of Cream and, Clapton and all that stuff. And then later on, I started to get into the art rock bands, the Steve Howes, and, Yes, Gentle Giant, King Crimson, Robert Fripp, and after that, I started to gravitate towards jazz guys like Wes and Johnny Smith and Pat Martino, who I love, and Kenny Burrell, a lot of different guys. And then, Chet Atkins was always in the background because I was a big fan of, and still am, big fan of like the Everly Brothers and that style of music. And Chet produced them, and he played, unbeknownst to me, he played guitar on, at the time, unbeknownst to me, he played guitar on a lot of those sides by the Everlys. And so that was an influence, as well as listening to early Elvis and James Burton being on those records, and, obviously Les Paul. And so it's just, my style is just really a hodgepodge of all these guys that I love the way they play, and try to pick up just like anybody else. I mean, I'm an untrained musician. I really don't read. I didn't have any schooling for music. It's just really, I'm really like a street guy that just picked up music, and just try to pick up little things along the way that would hit my ear in a certain way, and just try to extrapolate on it.
Well, it's really cool because you use elements of rock, jazz, and the blues with your signature use of the whammy bar and vibrato. Hey, can you play a few bars for us so we can hear what I'm talking about?
Well, I just happen to have a guitar here, AJ. So,
bravo! Private concert
Don't applaud. Send money. Don't applaud. Send money.
Hey, let's talk about your bands. You were in a lot of Boston bands that are legendary now. The Streets, Johnny Ace, Hidden Secret, and Hearts on Fire. I remember in the 70s, a little bit before my time, I say I remember, right? You formed the Streets, and your hit was the #1 on WBCN, Rock of Boston, What Gives? And you also toured with Aerosmith. What was that like?
Well, that was great. I mean, that was our first taste of, breaking out of, in Boston at that time, I think it was like 75, 76. Toured with them in 78, but up until that point, there were very few places really to play in Boston. You had the Raskella, you had Bunratty's, the Club, maybe Club 3, 4 or 5 places to play. And with all the bands, it was such a vibrant scene. There's a lot of competition to get gigs. So, maybe you'd play once a month, once every, 6 weeks or something like that. And then being involved with the Streets and being managed by, at the time, this guy by the name of Ray Tabano, who was Aerosmith's original guitarist before Brad Whitford. When Brad Whitford replaced Ray, Ray became Aerosmith's warehouse manager, where they did their rehearsals and did all their merchandising and stuff.
He also designed their logo.
He designed their logo and the Streets logo, actually, and named the band the Streets. So getting involved with Ray, we had this kind of close connection with Aerosmith. And as a matter of fact, the drummer of the Streets, Bobby Lytle, was in a band with Brad Whitford, and it was Bobby that convinced Brad to go play with Steven. So that there was a connection there right from early on. And they used to come to see us all the time at gigs at the Rad and at the Club. And we got asked to do a tour with them because David Krebs, at the time, Lieber Krebs, managed them, and he was interested in signing the band The Streets. So they got us a couple gigs. We had done Cape Cod Coliseum with Bob Seger, and then a couple other little gigs. And then we got this tour of about, maybe 15 or 16 shows with Aerosmith from the East Coast, maybe as far as Midwest, like Cleveland, Detroit, stuff like that. And it was a great experience because we had never done any real touring up until that point, and always just local gigs with local production. So to be involved, and do 3,000-4,000 seaters every night, right. It was a thrill. It was definitely a thrill.
Who was in the Streets with you?
It was Dean Cassell on bass. It was Steve Hannon fronting the band, Bobby Lytle on drums, myself, and Greg Towell on guitar.
And in 1980, you formed Johnny A's Hidden Secret, and you had the #1 hit on BCN again with No More Lonely Nights. But, I met you when in your next band, Hearts on Fire. And I remember I wrote you up for the cover story of the Beat magazine, and I also wrote your biography for Music Museum of New England. You can look that up on mmone.com, folks.
There was a couple different versions of the band. The first version of the band, which was kind of my favorite version of the band, because the idea of the band was this kind of rootsy type of acoustic electric, Everly Brothers meets the Beatles with kind of like country telly style guitar playing. And my wife was in the band with me, Beth. She sang with me in that band. Originally, there was a couple different drummers in that band: Michael Radovsky, Jim Tracy. Dean Cassell played bass in that band. One version of the band, Greg played acoustic guitar. Then later on, the band, kind of changed its direction and got more into a kind of like more of a rock type thing, where Beth completely just sang lead instead of the dual lead thing that we were doing before. And Mike Greeley was playing bass in that. Billy Clare was playing rhythm guitar in that. And
speaking about Billy Clare, he told me a funny story about Hearts on Fire. Not funny, and I want to clarify from you. There were 2 songs called If I Didn't Have You. Now, I remember, the reason I'm bringing this up is because you mentioned Billy Clare, but you also said at the end of the band, you start to get more rockin', and that was a rock and roll tune.
Well, If I Didn't Have You was kind of like an up-tempo. Originally it was kind of an up-tempo kind of country type of rockin' tune. And that ended up showing up on the Get Inside album, my second solo album, as an instrumental, and it got renamed Bundle of Joy. But
great song.
It's a cool song. It was good. I enjoyed that. But the first version of Hearts on Fire, I really liked that version of the band. We had this attorney that was trying to get us a record deal, and he was urging us to go into this more of a rock direction, like more of the Pat Benatar-ish type thing. And, I always felt that version of the band was really contrived and wasn't an honest version, where the first version was very much in the spirit of like something what Lone Justice was, but we were kind of pre-Lone Justice, and nobody really kind of knew what to do with us because there was none of that kind of rootsy rock stuff back then.
Right.
Those type of harmonies and those type of songs with that type of guitar playing really wasn't happening that much. So we kind of, as much as I liked the band and I thought it was a very good band and with good songs and a good style, it just really didn't go anywhere.
Let's get on to later on. You went to play with Bobby Whitlock, who you formed Bobby Whitlock's backing band with a local Boston talent. And Bobby Whitlock, for all you people that don't know, he was the founding member of Derek and the Dominoes and the keyboardist. And he wrote 8 out of the 12 or songs on Layla. He wrote or co-wrote them. He is a legend. How did you meet? And tell me about Bobby Whitlock.
Well, Bobby and I, the first time we met was probably around 1979 or 80. I got a phone call from this guy that originally was from Boston. You might remember the name Ray Perrette. Do you remember
Yes.
the name Ray Perrette? Okay, and I think he was involved at one time with Jonathan Edwards, and he had migrated out to LA and was doing management and stuff like that. Well, I got a call from him asking me to come to LA, and he never really told me why. I didn't have any assumption. I ended up going, and it turns out they put me up at the Hyatt, and we hung out at the record plant house up at Sunset, and it turns out what Ray wanted from me was the name The Streets. Because he was managing a band from, I think they were from the Midwest. They ended up putting out a record and they called themselves The States. But I didn't own the name The Streets. The name was given to the band by Ray Tabano, who he might have copywrote the name, I don't know. But it wasn't my name to give up or sell or anything or give license to. So I didn't have anything to do with it. But the one thing that came out of that is when I was at the record plant house one day hanging, Bobby Whitlock was there with Doug Clifford, the drummer from Creedence Clearwater. And there was some instruments around, so we proceeded to jam a bit.
And you went on tour with Doug.
No, I didn't go on tour with Doug. Elliot Easton went on tour with Doug.
But you played with him. Did you play on
Yeah,
his
what
album?
happened was we were up at this record plant house, and we jammed for the afternoon, maybe about an hour or so. And blah, 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 hung out. And then I ended up flying back home. About a week later, I got a call from Ray or Bobby, I can't remember which one, asking me if I would be interested in joining a band with them. They had a band that they were trying to put together. It was called California, and they were based out of San Francisco. And Duck Dunn ended up being the bass player in that band for a while. And I went out and I flew out to San Francisco, stayed at Doug Clifford's house, and I kind of rehearsed with them for about 2 weeks, maybe a couple of weeks. And we rehearsed at Cosmo's Factory, you know, the name of the Creedence album there. Well, that's where we rehearsed. And I don't know, I was still with the band, The Streets, and we were still getting interest from management and label stuff. And the Whitlock Clifford thing hadn't really crystallized into anything yet. It was pretty amorphic and, you know, in its very early embryonic stages, and it just didn't seem like it had a direction yet. So I just decided to fly back home and kind of hang there with my own band. You know, I was the principal songwriter and the front man of the band at the time. It was actually before it was a 5-piece band.
Right.
And so this might have been 78, actually, early 78. So I just flew back, and that was all I heard of Bobby Whitlock until years later, when the aforementioned Peter Lembo somehow got connected with Bobby Whitlock. And Bobby wanted to do some gigs and try to get a deal again, and he didn't have a band. And Lembo is the guy that mentioned my name to Bobby. He goes, "Oh, I remember that guy. I played with him in California." He goes, yeah, I really liked him. So I put the band together for Bobby, and we did a bunch of, I don't know, a couple months worth of gigging in the Northeast, and we ended up filming a TV special for a Japanese television show at the I think it was the Bottom Line in New York City. I think that's where we did that.
Who was in that band that you put together?
It was Bobby playing Hammond and piano. It was Stu Kimball playing guitar. That went on to work with me with Peter Wolf as well.
And he went on with Bob Dylan.
Yeah, for 15 years he was Bob. Dave Amaral played bass, and myself and a drummer by the name of Steve Barrett.
You know, I met Bobby Whitlock when you, Lembo, and Beth walked in to Harper's Ferry. And the first thing you guys did was have me guzzle a beer for him.
I don't remember that. I remember hanging out with you when I sat in with him at Johnny D's, though. But Bobby did live at my house while we were doing this stuff. And actually, I've got pictures of him with my daughter on his knee when she couldn't have been more than, I don't know, 3 or 4 years old at the time. And she's now 30-something, so 31, I think.
You were just talking about sitting in with him and Coco when they played at Johnny D's. That was a great gig. Please tell us about that. Johnny D's was a club that's since closed down in Somerville, Massachusetts. And then Bobby and Coco came in a very, very rare East Coast visit. And who shows up? Johnny A. And he sat in. You played a bunch.
He called me and he said, "Hey, man, come down. I'm playing in the gig. Come in." And then he just said, "You want to sit in for a couple?" And I didn't even have a guitar with me. I used whoever the guitar player was on stage. And we did a couple songs. I don't even remember what we played. Probably Tell the Truth.
Yeah, you did play Tell the Truth.
And maybe Bell Bottom Blues. I don't know.
Okay, let's talk about Peter Wolf. You know, you were the music director for 7 years with Peter. You went on a few national tours, you know, with Peter. What was that like? How'd you meet Peter?
I met Peter first. The first time I met Peter was when I think he was going to tour behind the Come As You Are album, maybe.
Right.
Maybe it was Up to No Good. I can't remember which album it was, but my friend, rest in peace, Jeff Golub, was the guitar player for Peter and did those records. And Peter was wanted to put a band together.
And Jeff was from Boston too, folks.
Well, originally Midwest.
But he lived here.
Yeah. So Peter was putting a band together, and Jeff brought Peter to see me at Bunratty's. I don't know which band I had at the time. It could have been Hearts on Fire. And wanted me to play guitar. Jeff wanted me to play the guitar in the band with him and Peter. But Peter he kind of rejected the idea because he thought that Jeff and I played very similar, and he wanted a different type of guitar player against playing with Jeff, sorry. And it's true, because Jeff and I definitely have parallel influences, and I can see where the similarity in our styles are. So that was the first time I met Peter, and the next time I had an encounter with Peter, I got called to do a session for a Christmas WBCN album, and they wanted someone to play acoustic slide.
Uh-huh.
And I was in the studio at Intermedia, a Synchro Sound, whatever it was called then.
The Cars on Synchro.
Cars place, yeah.
Yeah.
On Newbury Street. And I went in and I did that. And, Stu might have been on that session. I can't really remember who was on the session. But we did that. And I never really heard from him again. And then I got a call after the Bobby Whitlock thing. I think Peter heard me and Stu do a live thing on the radio with Bobby. And I got a call from someone that was kind of involved with Peter as a lawyer or a manager or something, this guy, Frank Simler. And Peter was putting together a big Peter got asked to do a big concert up at Laconia. And he was auditioning a bunch of guys to put a band together. I got that gig that time. And we ended up rehearsing, 5 or 6 weeks. And the permits fell apart for the gig. And none of the guys in the band were getting paid for these rehearsals. And, Peter, doing the honorable thing, said, well, let me put a handful of gigs together and get you guys some cake, and that 4 or 5 gigs turned into 7 years.
So you were on national tours with Peter. Are there differences? What are the differences or the similarities between an European audience and an American audience?
We didn't do any Europe dates. We just did the States and we did Japan.
Okay. What's the difference between a Japanese audience and an American audience?
A Japanese audience, and, I've been there several times. I was there with Wolf once I think we did 10 days there. And I've been there with my solo project about another 6 times. I've done Japan. At the time, especially with Peter, that was like probably 1997-ish or something. They were very quiet audiences. You walk on stage and it's like there's nobody in the audience. They're so quiet and so respectful for the music.
So respectful, right?
Yeah, really, really respectful of the music. And it's just one of these things where the song ends, everybody claps, and they all stop at the same time. It's one of those things. But very rabid fans. As a matter of fact, probably everybody in the band had some fans or girls that were, I used to get Christmas. I don't even know how these girls got my address, but I used to get Christmas gifts for years, robes and little candies and tiny little toys and keychains and all this stuff from these 3 girls. And they were great. It was just, it was fun. It was a great experience. This is the first time I was ever there was when Peter brought us over.
So let's talk about the Yardbirds. Like I say, you joined in the footsteps of Clapton, Page, and Beck, and you joined in 2015 for 3 years. And have you met Clapton, Page, and Beck?
I've met Page. I did Eric Clapton's Crossroads Festival, and I was within his orbit, but I didn't really go up to him and introduce myself.
And you did that rock and roll summer thing with Jeff Beck and Brian Wilson, right?
Yeah, rock and roll fantasy camp. But I also had met Jeff before because I opened up for him in Portland, Maine in 2000, I think.
Right.
2001. That's the first time I met him. And then I met him a couple other times because we had some mutual friends. And then I did a rock and roll fantasy camp where he was one of the marquee artists and I was one of the counselors. So we got to play together, which was a bucket list moment for me.
Hey, well, most important, let's talk about your solo career. All right. In 1999, you were released Sometime Tuesday Morning, and Oh Yeah became the nationwide hit. And was that on Stevie Vai's label, or was that your next album?
The way that happened was when I was on the road with Wolf, I remember playing Atlantic City, and I got a very severe bronchial infection, which kind of gave me an incredible bout of laryngitis, and my singing voice never really came back completely. So I really wasn't able to sing lead anymore. It kind of forced me to become an instrumental artist, actually, because I really wasn't an instrumental artist before, my first album. So I was rehearsing with the trio, and I ended up getting this little residency at a local bar in Salem, Massachusetts called the Dodge Street Bar and Grill. Used to do every Tuesday night or every other Tuesday night. Started to get a following, and this guy came in one night. They called him Lefty. His name was Paul Wennick. At one time, he worked for Polygram Records, and he lived in Salem, Mass. And he was still kind of connected with all the kind of movers and shakers in Boston. You know, the Andrew Cavazzoses and all the guys in town and the radio people. So he knew this guy in Salem that had a record label. He had a local record label, but he had national distribution. And his name was Doug Baumel. And he said, I'd like to bring this guy to see you to, see if you'd like to make an album. And I said, yeah, sure, whatever. I just didn't think much of it. I just figured it was lip service, And but he brought this guy, Doug, and the guy was interested in signing me to do a record. And I did sign a deal with him. And he ran out of money, and we were recording the record at Blue Jay. He ran out of money. I ended up buying the tapes from him, took a loan, and I finished the album, and I put it out myself on my own label, Aglaophone Records. And it started, I sold a bunch of copies, pretty much out of the trunk of my car, like maybe 8,000 copies from gigs and stuff, and started a little business when it started to get airplay. Started to get airplay on the river first, and then all these other New England stations started picking the song up, and they said they would call me and they'd say, hey, we're getting a lot of requests for this song and people want to know where to buy it. And they started to give me names of mom and pop record stores in their listening orbit. So I started consigning records to all these places in Burlington, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut. And the record picked up steam to one point where it became number 8 most added in the country, but it was only being played in New England, but it got added by so many stations at once. I was higher in the charts than Dylan and tied with Matchbox 20. I started to get, say again?
Didn't you like sell over 100,000 of the copies?
Yeah, that record's probably somewhere around, I know it's over 150. It could be closer to 100.
What's really important that you didn't even bring up was I think that was the first time in a decade that an instrumental album had reached that high.
It became a number one. I had a number one single on the AAA radio format, which was stations like The River and BOS.
But that was the first time. I mean, that's
the last guy was Eric Johnson that did that before me. And so it went on to sell quite well. And but before it got to that point, and it was kind of a regional thing, that's when I started to get calls from, Razor and Tie, Blue Note, RCA, Epic.
Right.
And I got a call from Steve Vai, and he wanted to re-release the record. He wanted to sign me to a licensing deal, which I did. And once I did that, that's kind of when the record really took off nationally and got a lot of sales. And internationally, it was, also number one on Amazon, and it was like number one in the blues charts in the UK. It did well, and because of the success of that record, that's when I was offered a record recording contract with Steve's label, Favored Nations. And I put my second album out. My first album was a licensing deal with Favored Nations. And then I signed a 3-album deal as a recording artist. And the second album, Get Inside, came out with
2004, right?
2004, yeah. And then, he had some changes in the regime of the business and the direction of what they wanted to do, and it really wasn't working. And I chose to get out of my deal with them. And, the options had expired, and I chose not to re-sign. And I just went completely independent at that point and put out the One November Night DVD that was recorded with Fellas in 2010. That was the next thing that was released. I couldn't record for a while because I was kind of under this. I wanted to do a live album next, and I was under this thing in my previous record contract that was called a no re-record clause, which means not re-record your own material.
You have 3 Johnny A. Gibson signature model guitars designed to your specs. What's the differences between the 3 guitars?
Well, there's actually 3 from Gibson and 1 from Epiphone. The original one, which I've been a Gibson artist since 1994. I got an endorsement deal with them while playing with Peter Wolf. And when Sometime Tuesday Morning took off, I got approached about doing a signature model with them. And that was the first one that came out in 2003, which was just the specs got a little different on the different models. In 2007, they released the standard version of that, which had different woods, different appointments on it. And then again, I think in 2011, they released another standard model that was altered from the first standard model. And then recently, maybe about 3-4 years ago, they released an Epiphone model, and that was a limited run. That was just a 2-year run on that one. But the Johnny A guitar
was still around.
Oh yeah, and it was the second most popular signature model guitar out of the Gibson custom shop behind a Les Paul.
Tell me about Les Paul.
Well, the first time I met Les was when the club in Cambridge turned into Night Stage. Remember when it was called Night Stage?
Right, and I remember he played there.
And he played there. Very rare for him to come to Boston. And this could have been like around 87 or something like that. And that's when I met him, and he signed the back of one of my Les Paul guitars. And that was it. And then being involved with Gibson like I was, and they would have these big summer parties at the plant and in Nashville. And Les was at one of them. And it was after my record came out, and he heard of my record. He was a very in-tune guy. He knew what was going on as far as guitar players goes. And someone had given him my record, and he was a fan. And so I met him a couple times there, and he was very friendly, very, very generous guy, very funny guy. And fast forward to 2004, when I was mixing the Get Inside album in Manhattan. I was mixing it at Unique Recording in Times Square,
right,
Nathan's place. It was a Monday. Was it a Monday or a Tuesday? I can't remember. And anyway, it was my anniversary. I decided to take the night off, had Beth come up on the train, and she was going to spend the night in Manhattan. We were going to maybe go to dinner or something. So she gets up there, and we're walking around. We're walking down Broadway, and we see the Iridium, and it says Les Paul tonight. So we go in. I'm standing in line. I just buy a ticket. I'm starved. We're starved out of our minds, right? And we're kind of there early, so we're in line first, and they put us in right in front of Les. I'm literally in the first seat next to the stage. As a matter of fact, I could touch his shoes if I wanted to. He has a little pedal board there, and so I'm sitting there, and they have food at the Iridium, and we ordered food, and I think I ordered chicken wings and just bar food, and it's taken so long for the food to come, and the crowd's filling up, and I'm sitting there and I'm waiting for the food and all the hustle bustle. And I said to Beth, I said, you watch what's going to happen. Les is going to come on stage and the food's going to come, and I'm going to have to eat while this guy's on stage. And I don't want to do that. So sure enough, as soon as the food comes, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Les Paul Trio. So here I am with greasy hands, eating chicken wings, like ravished out of my mind. And Les is a jokester. He will pick people out of the audience. And he kept looking at me in a funny way. I don't know if he probably recognized me, but didn't know from where. So
right.
He didn't really acknowledge me. And at one point he said, "Look at this guy. He hasn't stopped eating since he got here," in front of the audience. And, I'm pretty short, but I really felt short after that. And then he said something about my hair. And I said, "Well, my wife cuts my hair." He goes, "Oh, you look familiar." And then I told him, he goes, "Oh, yeah. He goes, "You want to come up and play a song?" So, I got greasy chicken wing. And so I went up, and that was the first time I sat in with Les. And
what'd you play?
I don't even remember. I have no idea. And then, people were very, very generous with their applause. And he says, "You want to play another one?" And I said, "Nah, I think I'll stop while they're still clapping." And he said to me, would you learn all those licks?" I said, "I stole them from you."
Great answer.
So that was the first time I sat in with him. And then the second time was just before he passed away. And I think Lou Paulo, who I recorded a tribute album with, a Les Paul Trio tribute album, I was asked to play on it with, Keith Richards was on it, and Billy Gibbons and Slash and a bunch of other guys. Lou Paulo told me that I think I was the last guy to sit in with Les. And so he asked me to cut Sweet Georgia Brown, which is on the record, which is the last song that Les ever played live.
When you played with Les, was John Paris there?
I don't think John was there. The first time I played with Les, John was there because he sat in with him too. The second time, I don't think John was there.
John used to play with Johnny Winter and has his own band, Rockola, and he's still in New York City, folks. So if you hear about John Paris playing, you definitely want to go see him.
Yeah,
so,
he's a good man. He's a sweetheart, that guy.
So getting back, you mentioned your album, your 2010, 1 November night came out, and that same year you were honored by the Boston Music Awards, and in 2014 you were named to their Hall of Fame. What does that mean, being named to the Boston Music Awards Hall of Fame?
I don't know. I can't get into anywhere free. I don't get any free meals. I mean, I don't know what it means.
Hey, in 2014, Driven, your album was released. It was your engineering debut, and you played it. You played all the instruments on the album, and you also told me you considered it your first complete solo album. Care to comment?
Well, in the respect that nobody else was involved in the record. I did all the drum programming, all the writing except for one cover song, all the producing, all the engineering, all the editing, all the mixing, all the recording. The only thing I didn't do was master the record. So that's what I meant as far as a complete solo work. It was really nobody else involved.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And it was a long, arduous process that took quite a long time to do that record. Have to talk about this. I told you we're going to have to bring it up, the 1986 Rumble. The WBCN Rumble, folks out there, that was a big event. WBCN was the Rock of Boston. They all had a competition, the Rumble, every year. And it went on for a bunch of years, and it was very big. And in 1986, Johnny A was in Hearts on Fire
which was more of a mainstream band, and they got into the finals with the punk band Gang Green. And Gang Green was very popular in Boston, and they were even more popular in Europe, I think, their manager once told me. But that was a wild, wild event. And it was, people are still talking about it 35 years later. Who should have won? Did the real band, should have won? What do you remember about the 1986 Rumble?
Well, what I remember is getting a call from Oedipus, who was, a long time in the hierarchy of WBCN, and Carter Allen asking us to do the Rumble. And Hearts on Fire was broken up. We weren't even a band at that point. And I just said, hey, we're not playing. We're not doing anything anymore. We kind of moved on to other things. He goes, oh, we really want you to do it. And, later on, I figured they were just trying to put something together, plot good against evil,
Yeah.
But
it was a dramatic event.
Yeah, well, I ended up reforming a version of the band for the Rumble, and we did it. And, I thought we did okay. We did an okay show.
You were great, Johnny. I was
there.
But
I have to say that as far as, I'm not a fan of Gang Green, but I will have to say that as far as like performance-wise, I think on that given night, I don't think they were a better band. I don't think they had better music. I don't think they were more musically tilted. But I would have to say, as a performance, I think they did a better job at what they did than we did at what we did, if you know what I mean.
Well, I was there, and I love both bands, and I wrote cover stories for the Beat magazine on both of you cats. Still two great bands. All right, let's talk about some of your current projects now.
I am involved with, I just finished recording basic tracks for 2 albums, actually, a volume 1 and a volume 2 of Beatles songs. And I'm in the overdub process of that right now. Pretty much completed volume 1. And I'll try to get that out by the end of the summer, early fall. And I don't expect much from it. The record business these days is not the same. But it's something that I wanted to do. And I've pretty much always been driven musically to not follow a trend and really just do what I feel passionate about at the time. So it will be an honest release, whether or not it falls on deaf ears, I don't really know.
Is it just going to be you playing it all?
No, I have a band. I used Dean Cassell on bass and the great Marty Richards on drums. And we cut 20 songs in 14 hours of recording time. And I used John Shipp as a recording engineer. We recorded at my home studio. And it came out nice. I'm really excited about the project. And the other thing I've been involved with is I've been doing a solo gig for 3 years, which I'm using like looping technology. No backing tracks, but all looping. And I was just calling that thing just me and my guitars. And I had toured for like 3 years solo with that until the pandemic, And, once the Beatle albums go out, I'll probably put an album out of that, looping show.
Give us a web address so people can find out what you are up to.
You can just go to johnnnya.com, JOHNNYA.com.
All right, that's cool. Now I'm going to ask you the question that I end all my podcasts, my Wachtelligence podcast with, and I think you answered it already, and I think I know the answer, but what was your first concert? It was the Beatles, right?
No, the first concert was, I did see the Beatles, though, in 1966. My first concert was earlier, was Chuck Berry. My mom had taken me to Revere Beach on a Sunday afternoon matinee to see Chuck Berry. It was a 4:00 show, I remember that. And it was, I forget the Ebb Tide. It might have been at the Ebb Tide. Something like that. I can't remember the name of the club, but it was Chuck Berry. I think that's the first concert I saw.
Johnny, Wachtelligence, was fun talking to you today. Thank you so much for spending the time.
I appreciate it. I appreciate the constant support, AJ. You've been stoic through the process.
True fact. Take care, buddy.
Okay.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Wachtelligence. You can connect with me on Facebook at Wachtelligence. Thanks to my producers, my son Harrison and David Schwartz and Harvey Brooks for my theme song. Don't forget to subscribe.
I don't care what you think of me. Don't need no jailer to set me free. Don't want strangers filling up my cup. Don't need no advisor to show me down from up.